This is our first workshop in a series of workshops where we're trying to increase inclusivity and equity on the team in terms of opportunities within STEM. And so for our workshop today, we'll be learning more about the experiences of members of the LGBTQ community in STEM. And so I'd like for everyone to first remember that this is a safe and inclusive space. So we should all keep an open mind when discussing these topics. They're pretty heavy and pretty serious. And so now I'd like to hand it over to our wonderful representatives from the Turing Circle, which is an Australian organization that advocates for LGBT involvement in STEM. So Tana, if you'd like to take it away.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Ria, for the introduction. And thank you also for reaching out to us. This is to Ria and the MVRT team for this initiative, this really fantastic initiative that you started off for this year. It's really great to have been invited to participate in this. And I'm hoping that throughout the course of the next hour and a half, that we'll have some really fantastic dialogues on the topic of being rainbow or being LGBTQIA in STEM. So my name is Tanner. I am the co-founder of Turing Circle, which is a LGBTQIA, or we sometimes do call it rainbow, organisation for STEM individuals in Australia. My background, I'm a mechanical and biomedical engineer, and I work in transport and road safety as a consultant. So the format of today's workshop is going to be just me delivering a brief introduction to Turing Circle and the Turing Circle team. There is an agenda that's popped up in the chat sessions as well, so please feel free to click on that and have a look at the agenda. I believe Ria may have sent that out as well earlier this week. So we've broken up into a few sections. So there'll be a talk or two, followed by a brief Q&A session to allow some of the questions to come through, and followed by another talk, another brief Q&A session, and then a final talk, and then a longer, roughly about 20 minutes Q&A session. That will hopefully allow you, quite a number of you to ask your questions and have them answered as well by the various panelists. So I'm going to do a quick introduction to Turing Circle, and then I'll introduce each of the panelists as they come up for their talk. So that will give you, that way it will give you a good idea on their background and any questions that you may want to ask. So Ria and I have asked all the panelists to deliver talk and share their stories on being rainbow in STEM. So you're going to have a vast background to and amount of stories coming from the four panels we have today. So hopefully I'll give you a good introduction to the positives and the not so positives that we faced during our careers and during our education in STEM. So very briefly, Turing Circle was started in August 2017 in Sydney, Australia. I am one of the co-founders. The other co-founder who can't be here today, unfortunately, is Peter, who is a emeritus professor and geologist at the University of Adelaide. So Turing Circle was named after Alan Turing, who was a British mathematician, computer scientist, cryptographer in the 1930s, 1950s. He served the UK government in his most prominent role to crack the German World War II code that then allowed the British government and the Allies, including the US, to actually to understand the messages that Germans were sending to, and this was what allowed the war to start turning into the Allies' favors, Allies in terms of US and UK and a few other countries as well. So that machine that decrypted the German code was called Enigma. There's a movie that was produced a few years ago that you may be interested in watching that focused on Enigma and Alan Turing's contribution to World War II and in other fields of science and computer science and mathematics. Unfortunately, because being gay was not very well accepted back in the 1950s, Alan Turing actually did sadly take his life because of this. And his legacy that left on, we've decided that it's actually very appropriate for us to name our organization in his honor. More recently, Alan Turing was named in the top 100 as the most influential and important people in the 20th century. So hence the reason why Turing Circle has come about, or the name Turing Circle. We aim to bring rainbow people in Australia together to support each other, to network and to connect with the wider community. We organise regular events such as monthly socials, picnics, trivia nights, talks and e-talks such as this one here. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our first two speakers, which will present one after the other. The first one, Gary, if I can just get a wave your hand, Gary, so people can identify you. Perfect, so that's Gary. He's a very well-known food and safety scientist and inspector in Australia. He does have run his own company, which works in that area. He's also on the Australian Standards Board for food safety, and he's also a committee member for Turing Circle. After that, we will have Marcel. Marcel, I'll get you to wave your hand again. Marcel is a cryptographer. He completed his PhD in Aarhus, Denmark. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He has also lived in Bristol in the UK, and he's mainly had really positive experiences through his career. So hopefully that will come out through his story that he'll share it with us today. So without further ado, I'd like to hand this over to Gary. Take away, Gary.
I'm run a company in which I'm a trainer and presenter, so I've done a PowerPoint presentation, of course. If I can hit share screen, hopefully this works. Share. How are we going? Can we see?
Yep, all good,
yeah.
Gary.
There's a picture of me at a party. So I suppose we're going to talk about a little bit about background, and I'm old, and I'd say that quite happily. I joke in Australia that I've had they give you a free swabbing kit when you're older than 50 in Australia for bowel cancer. I've had several of those. So the free ones, not bowel cancer. So we'll go through what Australia was like when I grew up, what it's like to be a child or a teenager and know you're gay or think you're gay. And that was a blowfly, very Australian summer. I've got a blowfly in my home office. Then I'll talk a bit, I suppose we'll do this in parallel. I'll talk about what happened in terms of my gay life, and then parallel that to my working career and show how they matched up to some extent. And I suppose in summary, you can be out and be as gay as you like, almost in some professions, provided you're good at your profession. So I was born in 1961, working class parents. Father was an infantryman in the army. We moved about a lot. In my family, homosexuality, a male homosexuality was pedophilia. My father said to his three sons to be wary of poofters as they're out to rape you. Actually, he used far more colorful language than that. And he also said all poofters should be jailed or shot. For the Americans, that's the proper way of spelling jail, the English way of spelling jail, he says. In the 1970s, when I was a teenager, male homosexuality was punishable by 14 years in prison with your name and occupation published in newspapers in the crime reports. Male homosexuals could be sacked from government jobs such as school teachers, university staff. Even a government bus driver or street sweeper could be sacked for being convicted of being homosexual. Poofter bashing was a rite of passage for young drunken straight men, especially around the bar districts in Sydney. It was you sort of took your life into your hands if you left the bar late at night on your own in the 1970s. Police rarely prosecuted as being gay. You were doing something that was illegal. And that newspaper headline there, the picture there is of a TV weatherman who was gay and he disappeared, never found, left a bar in Sydney and they never found the body. There are a number of murders of gay men being thrown off cliffs to their deaths. And all of those were put down as suicides. As well, we had multiple missing person cases with men last seen in gay beats. The picture there is actually of an American uni student who was murdered by being thrown off a cliff around Sydney, and his murderer was only convicted late last year. So these weren't times to be flamboyant and walking down the street with hand in hand with your partner. You really did take your life into your own hands back in the 1970s. And that's the background which I thought, oh, I'm in that background. So let's move on to some good stuff. That's all the bad stuff. Hopefully, it's worth noting, Sydney, some of you may know, has a Mardi Gras parade, and younger people see that as a parade. I don't. I still see that as a protest march, in much the same way like the Stonewall riots in New York. The first Mardi Gras parade was a protest. It wasn't a celebration. And for older people, we still see that as a, effectively the old "we're here, we're queer" protest march. This is our way of being out and showing you're not going to put us back in the closet again. All right. I hated the all-boys high school I went to. I really didn't fit in. Our school rugby coach, who coached the school rugby team, later became the Australian rugby coach. If you didn't play rugby or surf, you were an outsider. I was a gay scientist who was good at school. I ticked multiple boxes for the school bullies. I was regularly harassed. However, looking back now, the little gaggle of group I got together, when we now know 20 to 30 years on, it was all the gay boys. We all managed to find each other, even though none of us were out. It's so that gaydar thing happens even back when you're not quite sure. It still works. All right. I left school. I went to study food science at the University of New South Wales, which is based in my home city of Sydney. Everyone eventually finds their group. And for those who are wondering, will I ever fit in? Yeah, you do fit in somewhere. You eventually find your group. I found two, one reflecting sort of the gay side of me, and one reflecting the science part of me. And 1 week out of high school, I basically did not see anyone from high school again, except for two people. And I've really only ever stayed in contact with two people from high school, and I left it all behind. The first group of my university contacts, I still do occasional lectures at uni. And one thing I do say is that the people you're sitting next to, you'll still know in 40 years' time. The university context, the Australian expression would be daggy. The word would be nerdy in America. We were the same. We both liked science, we liked food, we got on with each other. And I'd also never had female friends. I only had brothers. My father was in the army. I went to an all-boys school. It was quite a surprise to go to university, and suddenly I had a lot of female friends. And of course, they all thought I was gay. So they thought, oh, he's perfectly safe. They were right, of course. The other group I found was the Rocky Horror dress-up crowd, and a real bunch of social misfits and outcasts who accepted anyone. And really, this was my first group of gay friends. This is the first group of people I really felt community, I was related. And that's me on Friday night. This is actual photos of me dressing up. I was one of those people who went to Rocky Horror on Friday nights. And the New South Wales and Sydney people would know, of course, I've been on that particular quiz program where my expert special topic was Rocky Horror. I've been quite out in terms of the community. I was a DJ on Out FM, the gay radio station. In 1995, I entered the Mardi Gras parade for the ABBA fan club. I was dressed as Bjorn. That's me on the right in the blue shirt with the guitar. And I choreographed Mamma Mia and Dancing Queen. The bit where the girls rip off their white skirts to the mini skirts, we choreographed that. That got a big cheer. I joined Sydney Leather Pride. I eventually became president of Leather Pride, running the Inquisition dance party. On the right there is me. That's taken at 9:30 in the morning, back of house at a dance party. I'm running for 2,000 people. In the middle there, that's me as president of Leather Pride at the Sydney equivalent of the Folsom Street Fair, if people know that from San Francisco. And on the left is one of me. That was an officer in a gentleman party, and that's me dressed in the Tom Hanks outfit from Philadelphia. In terms of my profession, I've somehow managed to keep being me, the gay man, while working in food industry and with industry associations. I spent many years working in probably one of the most blokey industries, the meat industry. Part of my job was working in abattoirs. You can't get more, if you like, more masculine or male than that, perhaps. I didn't advertise the fact I was gay, but everyone knew. And in fact, I now realize, I go, oh, everyone knows the whole way along. They just don't mention it to you. Provided you do your job, that's really what they want. So there's me at the meatworks. You can still see the dial-up phone, but I suppose to show you, this is the sort of job I used to work in. There's me at the abattoir in the butcher part. How have I progressed? I found that putting yourself forward is a way to advance in your career. I've worked night shifts. I've traveled interstate for work. I've traveled overseas as part of my job. Simply when people say, is there anyone to do this? Putting myself forward as the one who could do it really has progressed me. And the fact that I was gay was not really part of that consideration. I would say that volunteering on professional bodies has been one of the big booms for me. It gives you a huge network of peers to call on. I know when I set up my own business, I didn't have to advertise because my colleagues knew I'd set up the business and came to me. And that old adage that most jobs are not advertised is true. At least in my profession in food science, 90% of jobs are not advertised. People come and headhunt you. And so the more high profile you are, the better. I've done all right in my career. My professional body is the Australian Institute of Food Science and Technology. I was on the national board for 16 years. At one stage, the board had a leather man as the secretary and a bear as the public officer and treasurer. I was made a fellow of my profession, so I'm an honorary fellow of my profession. And one of the committees I'm on, the Institute of Hospitality and Healthcare, has made me a life member for food safety in hospitals and aged care. So if you like, even if you're gay, they really don't care if you do the job, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. I serve on national scientific bodies. I've been a keynote speaker at international congresses. I've co-authored 35 papers. I have 6 industry codes of practice. Being gay has not got in the way of profession. I was the food safety advisor to SOCOG for the Sydney Olympic Games. I run my own successful business, names that you would know, KFC, Coca-Cola, Aldi, McDonald's, all clients of mine in Australia and around the world. But while, I suppose lessons learned, while I've never openly shouted from the rooftops that I'm gay, you know, I've never worn rainbow colored t-shirt to work, but I've never denied it either, and I've never really hidden it. I've even used it to my advantage. I've pointed out blatant discrimination in professional situations, which you can do when you're in a press minority. When you say something and people go, oh, you're a press minority, and they go, oh, if you like, it's colloquially and lightheartedly, but from someone who's coming from a position where you're constantly discriminated against, when you say that's discrimination, I won't say they take it more seriously, they take it more genuinely, is what I'm suppose I'm saying. And on occasions, I've made it fairly obvious which side I back for. I'll give you some examples where you can be very gay at an industry event. That's me chairing a food science workshop held at a zoo. Tana, that's the Werribee Zoo in Victoria, where there was a function. That's me in a leopard skin vest and leather boots, but I can go further than that. That's me chairing a food science social event where the meat industry are a sponsor. Leather is a byproduct of the meat industry, so I wore an outfit in theme. You had to wear something meat related as part of it for the industry dinner. Most people came wearing, you know, something cook's outfits or things like that. I wore full leather. And in fact, I rode in on the back of a motorcycle through that dinner. Okay. Lessons learned. You can have a successful career and be out, to use that expression. Most people really don't care who you sleep with, provided you're professional and you do your job. increasingly so as prejudice lessen. You know, I'd be happy to walk down the streets now in Sydney with my partner. I wouldn't have done that when I was a teenager. Your individuality, the very things you were picked on at school, can be the things that set you up in your professional career. Your individuality, the subtle things that make you what you are, is what sets you apart in hundreds of people who are all the same and mediocre. That spark that you've got makes you stand out and makes you the person who people are looking for. Thank you. Oh, stop sharing screen.
Thank you very much, Gary, for sharing your walkthrough of how being rainbow or being gay throughout the last few decades have changed. And it's really good to hear that the changes have generally been very positive, and that's been allowed by our allies, or who I refer to as our straight or heterosexual counterparts. So for those who are listening today, who are our allies, we do thank you for your support over the last few years and decades to enable us to be who we are at work, and to judge us not on our gender or our sexuality and sexual preference, but on how on our performance at work. And I think that's a really important takeaway message from Gary as well, that it really you should be judged on what you contribute to your school work, to your university work, or to your workplace, rather than who you are outside the office. I'm not going to, we're not going to take any questions just yet. Just got one more brief talk to go through by Marcel, and then we'll open up to a Q&A session. So Marcel is now based in Sydney. He's completed his PhD in Aarhus in Denmark, lived in Bristol, and he's predominantly got a very good positive experience through his career. So and he works as a cryptographer. So I'll hand over to Marcel, and look forward to hearing your story.
Yeah, thank you, Tana. So I think it's kind of like interesting to put Gary and me next to each other, because there's quite a lot of difference in time and continent and whatnot. So I grew up in Switzerland, and in a different decade. So like homophobia definitely wasn't a hallmark. Whenever I grew up, I mean, sort of like in the 90s, I guess sort of the public discourse wasn't that woke yet. But I remember there was the sort of like a circular of a supermarket chain who had an article on gay or homosexual couples. And I remember I looked at it and I was like what's this about? But there was like nothing really like disparaging, right? Yeah, still took me some time to come out, which I put down like to me being more of a more of a nerd, and maybe not very secure. And basically, as soon as I came out during university, there was virtually no pushback. One thing I remember is like a uni colleague said, "Oh, that's interesting. I thought you were asexual," because I would not just never discuss sex in any way. Yeah. So, and then how should I put this? Yeah, so basically, like by and large, I named my brief segment "People versus Places" because there was just never sort of any real pushback from people. After I came out the first time, wherever I would go, I would eventually come out never really on day one marching in with rainbow flags, but as soon as you kind of got your colleagues to know better, and you would have drinks, it would come up sooner or later. However, what I found is sort of like the places part, because I went on a research career. And of course, for that, you have to go to a university, to university to study, then university to get a PhD degree, near another university to get a postdoc. and I found that at least in Europe, like a lot of universities are in small towns that are just not that much fun, like to live in, being gay. It wasn't really like, you know, 1970s Sydney, like homophobia. That was the problem. It was just like, if you got a small town, you got a small gay community. And even if there usually is a gay community, it's like just the intersection between, like, you know, being gay and your other interests. It's just like really, really like special, and I tended to feel alone in those places. So like Aarhus is the second largest city in Denmark, about 250,000. And what I found is just people flee for Copenhagen. And even though Bristol in England is a bit bigger, like we're talking like 500,000 people, still doesn't really kind of sustain, I would say, a really diverse gay community. And that's why I was really happy when I moved to Sydney to find out that there's something called Turing Circle, where it's essentially the gay nerds, or well, the LGBT nerds, but as it so happened, like the majority is gay in such communities, and nonetheless named after Alan Turing, which is of course like a person that I look up to, because he essentially founded my research field. Even though he fought my country of ancestry, because my mom is German, but I think that's for the better, because like nobody likes the Nazis. So yeah, I think that's my up to 5 minutes introduction to myself.
Thank you, Marcel. That's really insightful. And I did place Marcel and Gary right next to each other in terms of talks, because I wanted to capture the differences of growing up in the 1960s, 1970s, which Gary captured really well. And it shows that the rainbow community has gone through in terms of voicing what our needs are, which is to be accepted as part of society, and to not be classified as illegals. And that of Marcel, who went to university and completed his education in the 90s and early 2000s. So that's been a stark contrast and difference between just even in the span of about 20 or 30 years, the change that occurred in laws and societal acceptance. So this is partly thanks to our predecessors who have argued and fought for our rights, and also the acceptance of the greater population as well, that we are less judged now than we were before. So I'm going to stop my talking now, so I can blabber on for quite a fair bit, and just open the floor to any questions that you may have. And again, please send your questions via the chat function to Ria and Sihun, and they'll pick the questions for us to answer. We may not get through all of them in this session, but we will definitely try to get through them in the last Q&A session.
All right, so I have a question for Marcel. How is kind of like kind of helped you feel more find a community within STEM that also like embraces your sexuality? Because I feel like it must have been quite lonely with not having like a community that shares your own interests, right? Maybe.
Yeah, so like you partially like cut out during your question, but if I like understand it right, is like, yeah, you ask about kind of loneliness and like about that like intersection a community. I think it was particularly bad during my PhD, because there was like really like nothing in Aarhus, like no gay student union or anything. Like it was a bit better in Bristol, because there was like the LGBT like staff club, but that was like over like across all the uni. So there were like, again, there were like lots of administrational people in there, which is of course fair enough, but that's still so like different life experience and different like career, being an administrator at university versus a researcher. So yeah, I guess like you're absolutely right. There was a feeling, of and loneliness. Eventually, I found, like through the networking at conferences, like a select few researchers in my area where we sort of like would hang out at conferences, but you know, conferences only like a few times a year for a couple of days. So yeah, I guess it's like not like basically what you do is sort of like you sort of split your personality. Like, you know, like you have your work colleagues who are dominantly straight, and for them like with them you kind of like cover your professional interest, and then you have your side of being gay, and you find like some gay friends outside work, and you cover that, and yeah, you just don't whatever, yeah, you just don't get to find someone in the intersection, but in the end, like, you still manage to pass your days. And again, this is like really why I really like Turing Circle.
Thank you so much, Marcel.
No worries.
Okay, one question that I got, which is sort of similar to Seun's question about making a more inclusive community. So what are some ways, and I guess this is for both Marcel and Gary, on our team, which isn't specifically dedicated to like LGBTQIA people in STEM, but how can we make sure that our team is more inclusive, regardless of the fact that we're not specifically only dedicated to that mission, but we still want to have an inclusive environment where people are allies and everyone's like sexuality and identity is respected.
Gary, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I suppose it's like anyone who feels they're part of a minority, whether that's race, religion, sex, sexuality, age, ability, disability, any of those. The prime thing is not to make them feel awkward, I suppose, is the easy way. If you really want to make, you know, a gay scientist awkward, say, so, you know, ask them about their sex life, you know, that instantly puts you offside. You know, in much the same way that if I went to some of you and said, so how was sex last night? You know, you would be offended. Some people really do equilibrate gay with sex. You know, I'm not, you know, not in terms of gay and the sexual act must be always part of your life. God, I'm old, you know, if I can't do that every day. It's, I suppose part of this, to answer your question, is don't make an issue of it. Just accept people for what they are, in much the same way, you know, again, race, age, religion, sex, sexuality, it's not it's not them. You know, if I want to come across as gay, you know, I would show up in a rainbow shirt or show up in my leather pride outfit. I'm going to a function this week for a skydiving club, which my partner's running, the Pride Boogie, which apparently is what scientists, skydivers call a fun weekend. So we're doing a rainbow skydiving thing this weekend, and I'm catering. Because, of course, food scientists supposedly know how to cook, like engineers. Marcel can fix a phone. You know, I must know how to cook because I have a science degree. And that, I suppose, that's an example where skydiving is a very heterosexual straight profession. You know, they really don't care if you're gay or lesbian, as long as you can jump out of a plane. And I suppose that's where you want to go to. It really, the way to get someone accepted in is to not make them feel different. That's a long-winded way of coming to that simple conclusion.
No, thanks for that, Gary. I do agree as well, as to not make their gender identity an issue, but accept them for who they are in terms of the skills, and focus on the other aspects of that person's qualities as well. The other thing that I will also suggest as well is, if you were to ask them about normally be asking about their partner in terms of how's your girlfriend if the other person's a male, or how's your boyfriend, the other person you're talking to is a female, I tend to use the more neutral term, which is partner. And that way it could also indicate that they could have a partner of the same gender or opposite gender. And the other item that I just want to touch on really briefly as well, the fact that you've organized this event is a really great indication as well. So do put this up on the website if you're inclined to do so, or in indication somewhere on your website that yes, you have participated, or invite Turing Circle along, and that we're an LGBT organization. So stuff like that will actually help other members feel more welcome as well, that you are open to having them on board.
I suppose one other just brief point, and this applies again across all categories, not just, you know, the rainbow category. The last thing you want to be is the token person there. The last thing you want to be is brought along because, oh, we need one of those. That really makes you feel awkward. And that applies again across, not just across the rainbow, across all categories. The last thing you want to be is the token person invited to make up the numbers.
Yeah, agreed. That's a very good point as well, Gary. Yeah. Ria, just being conscious of time, shall I move on to the next? Oh, sorry, Marcel, anything else you want to add to that response?
No, really. I mean, well, maybe yes. I mean, like, because like of my different experience, basically, like for me, like part of the sort of like awkwardness is also like when I see people sort of like trying to walk on eggshells around the issue. So I think I would add it's also like, it's also like a personality thing. So I love banter. And like if you're around me, like there can be like one or the other joke about me being gay, if it's not like sort of like a constant like constant needling. But that of course is like very dependent on the like on the environment, like how well you know, like how well you know each other, like overall culture. I would say sort of like European and probably Australian academic culture is kind of quite, how should I say, like sort of very easygoing. So I think it's kind of like more like more is possible there, but that's sort of like, that's all very individual, I guess, in the end.
Thank you, Marcel. Now, it's a very good point as well. Get to know the individual before introducing any jokes. Some people are very okay with it and happy with it. But again, I think just building that level of trust as you get to know someone.
We all know the filthy, we know all the filthy gay jokes, but we can tell them. It's like any minority can tell the really bad jokes within that minority, but people outside that, no, you shouldn't assume you can.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Gary and Marcel. They'll be around through to the last panel session as well, or Q&A session rather. So next speaker I would like to introduce is Theatin. Theatin, I'll just get you to wave your hand so we can identify you. Brilliant. So Theatin is a third-year chemical engineering PhD candidate at UNSW, University of New South Wales. Incidentally, that's where Gary and I also graduated from as well. It is one of the more popular universities for technology and science in Sydney. So a number of us are from there. Her interest is in benefiting human health through their research using nanoparticles for drug delivery. That's her research, that is. She's also the, they are also the Athena Swan Committee member for promoting equity and diversity within UNSW. And she's also Turing Circle's Vice President in Sydney. So Theatin, can I hand this over to you?
Yep. Can you all see my screen? Is it sharing? Yep. Okay, cool. So today I will be talking about LGBT visibility and invisibility. So probably more focused on invisibility and then that move towards becoming more visible. So the outline will be a bit about me, about a concept called genderbread, then defining invisibility, the impacts, the coming out process, and also becoming visible and at school and at work visibility there as well. So a bit about me. So Tana's already introduced myself, but just to explain my gender and sexuality. So I identify as pansexual and non-binary, and I'll go into that a bit more in the next slide. So yeah, Tana's already mentioned some of the volunteering, and that's a photo of me presenting one of my early research presentations. So the genderbread concept, I thought I'd just put this up just to show that this has been developed by some researchers to explain the concept, the differences between identity, sex, sexuality, expression, and attraction. So I've kind of included sort of like little X's on where I would fit within this. So gender identity, I don't identify as woman or man, so I feel more neutral and in between the two genders. So that's encapsulated by the non-binary gender. And then gender expression, so I guess like with anything, like you just kind of have to make it fit yourself a little bit. So I wouldn't like necessarily put X's that are static on this for me. So like I've just highlighted that I feel that comfortable fitting into like androgynous, femme, or gender neutral expression, and probably not as masculine as much as those three. And then for biological sex, I have female parts, so breasts and female, whatever they're called, biological parts. So yeah, that's how I was born. So that's the biological sex. And then sexual attraction. So I said I'm pansexual. So for me, that means that I am attracted to someone regardless of their sex or gender. So I could be attracted to like a man, woman, trans woman, like it doesn't really matter to me. I do find myself potentially more attracted to trans women. So my current partner is a trans woman, and previous partners have all been either women or trans women. And then, yeah, even this, you can kind of see that it's just split into woman and man, but it doesn't really include like gender neutral people. So I guess like with anything, you have to take it with a grain of salt and see how it fits you. But it's a good place to start if you want to understand yourself a bit more. So now I'll go into what do we mean by invisibility. So basically there's different levels of invisibility. So starting at societal, so this could be like something that's happening globally or within a country. So it's a very high level. So I think in the past, we've had a far greater lack of acceptance of LGBT people. So there was the push to convert or do conversion therapy on people who were homosexual. And in this like sort of rainbow scale, we now go all the way to societies where LGBT people are accepted and included. And that's obviously where we all want to reach. But sadly, parts of the world are still sort of, everyone's a bit all over the place. So you can see in the laws around the world, a lot of Africa, parts of Asia and Russia are still sort of quite behind and not accepting of LGBT people. And it could even be still criminalized there. People are still being killed for being homosexual or transgender as well. Other legal issues, things like marriage equality. So Australia recently allowed LGBT people to get married, which is great. Then there's also the community level. So if like you might be part of a country that has good laws and that sort of thing, but you might be part of a religious community, conservative background, or even a place that's quite rural and just doesn't, you might be the only homosexual person or LGBT person in the town, so that town doesn't have the exposure and the lack of awareness. So there's that sort of community invisibility as well to LGBT people. Then I guess there's also like the more personal level. So that's your own personal self. So it could be that you have a lack of awareness of your own sexuality or gender. So that's like before you've come out, you might not have the words to describe how you're feeling yet. Then you might start researching, meeting people, come out, and you've changed from within yourself, like from that invisibility into like being visible as to who you are. And then there's the way other people might perceive you. So that comes down to expression. So someone could be invisible like on the street because they don't fit with the stereotypes of what LGBT people are perceived as. So such as like, oh, that person must be straight because all gay men dress effeminately. So, or like someone, a woman looks straight because, you know, someone stereotypes that all lesbians have to look butch and not femme. So those kind of things can also mean that people are invisible. But I think Gary kind of touched on that, like you don't have to dress a certain way to, like it's within yourself. You don't have to always express it outwardly in your dress or clothing. That's a personal preference. So invisibility in STEM environments. So STEM environments in the past in particular have been largely heteronormative. So thinking like the white, straight male, married with kids kind of environment. However, statistically around 10% of people in STEM are LGBTQIA+ these days. And despite this, there is still a lack of LGBT role models as well as support within STEM. So STEM has an issue with attracting and also retaining minorities, including LGBT people. However, change is happening. So Tana introduced Alan Turing. So yeah, he's kind of like the father of AI, who was criminalized because he actually spoke out and didn't hide the fact that he was gay when he called the police to his house to report a break-in. So some of the impacts of invisibility can include impacts on mental health. So people can suffer depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation. They might be isolated, like all sorts of mental health issues. So, and one of the reasons for this is that if you are keeping your identity a secret, it can be mentally and emotionally exhausting. So for trans and non-binary people, this could lead to increased dysphoria if they can't express themselves and be perceived by other people as who they are. And it can lead to negative coping mechanisms like self-harm, substance abuse, eating disorders. So I did Google and see what is available in America, and it looks like there's a group called the Trevor Project, and they're kind of like a supportive helpline that provides support to youth who are LGBT. So they've got a phone and web chat. So I guess if you are experiencing emotional or anxiety, mental health issues, you can give them a call, or if you know a friend that is, then you can say that there is some help out there as well. So one of the first steps that people take is in moving from invisibility to visibility is coming out. So coming out to the self, then friends, family, colleagues, and then extended acquaintances. So that first time coming out can be quite an emotional time, both positive and negative, depending on how people are responding to you. Another thing to note is that you often need to come out multiple times. So sometimes people, like, they come out for the first time to their friends and family, and they sort of like cheer and go, yay, I've done it, like I'm out. And then they realize over time that it's not a one-time thing. It's like changes happen in your life and you have to come out sort of over and over again to the new people that you meet. I'm not sure if we have time to go into my story, but if you have questions, you can ask that later. So becoming visible, so that would include coming out. It might include like changing your expression, like clothing, the way you express yourself, like particularly if you're trans or non-binary. You could join groups, volunteer. There's lots of events on Meetup or online that you can find groups in your area that have LGBT theme, as well as attending queer events or LGBT parties, that sort of thing. And at work, participating in inclusion programs like equity and diversity. So just, I think the final slide is just about school and the workplace. So I guess what's important, like if you're moving to a new workplace or in your current workplace, if you want to improve diversity and inclusion, is that you look at a whole organisation approach. So it's not just like a token flag on your website, but you're going deeper than that, and it's infiltrating the entire organisation. So that includes like training for management and staff, so that sort of everyone's on board with what you're changing. And then if you're moving to a new workplace, you could always, or in your current workplace, you can check things like, are there any visible LGBT role models there? Is there an ally system that straight and LGBT people can join to support people that are coming out? Is inclusivity mentioned in policies? What are the inclusive gender markers listed on forms and that sort of thing? And do employees use pronouns in their email signatures as a gesture of support? So I think some of those things are really important to move from integration, where like you're just a lone huddled group of people in a minority, to inclusion where everyone's inclusive and supportive of everyone despite their differences. So there's some of the resources that I used when I was looking for images and statistics, that sort of thing. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Thea. I think that was really, really great presentation, walking through parts of your life story and sharing some advice, especially towards the end as well. I'm hoping that MVRT, that you may be able to take some of the advice that Thea has put up. I've certainly learned a few things there as well, especially with the gender bread as well. I didn't realize existed. So thank you very much for giving that insight, Thea. That's fantastic. So I'm sure there are probably a few questions to come up. Siwon, would you like to pass us a question, maybe two, and maybe we'll just do one for the moment, and then we'll go on to the speaker, and then we can have a larger Q&A session with all the panelists involved.
What's one way? I think you mentioned integration and kind of letting your friends like know that there are resources to help, but like what's one way specifically that you think MVRT could make our space a little bit more inclusive for trans people? Because I definitely think that there is a lot more marginalization in the Bay Area for trans people, and I think that's like a pretty big issue that we should talk about.
I think like policy, for one thing, like in HR, is really important to establish, so that if you do have trans people at your organization or that have either come out or haven't come out, that if they're then going to undergo gender reassignment surgery, that they know that there's support and a plan that they can follow in place. So I know that at UNSW, there's like a 2-page sort of document of everything you would need to go through in order to like the take leave, that sort of thing. So I guess that's more around supporting someone who transitions whilst they're at work and then comes back to the workplace after they've transitioned. But I guess on a day-to-day basis, yeah, I guess it's making sure like that whole, like the organization has a whole approach. So having training for staff and team members, that sort of thing would be really important. I know sometimes when a trans person has started in a new workplace where there hasn't been sort of policies or that sort of awareness amongst staff set up, that the company will actually have a special information session for the team that person is joining, to explain like this person is trans, and to ensure that the team are going to be accepting and supportive of that person from the day that they walk in the door. Yeah.
Additionally, is it possible to explain a little bit more about the gender binary and how kind of in addition to expression like your identity and sex a little bit, can you explain a little bit more about the genderbread?
The genderbread, yeah. I think like so it's sort of like broken into the 4 components. So there's like your sex, so that's like the body and the parts that you're biologically born with. So traditionally that's either male or female characteristics, or it could be that you're intersex as well and have characteristics of both genders. Then there's sexuality, which is who you find yourself attracted to. And that's generally sort of gender based attraction kind of as well. So like if you're attracted to a male, a woman, non-binary person, trans person, like that sort of the identity of the person that you're attracted to. Then there's the expression, so how you express yourself. So I think for like non-binary people, I find like invisibility is like interesting, because for me, I am perceived as a straight woman probably when I'm walking down the street, more so if I have long hair and wear a dress. So I would get like tons of looks from guys when I walked down the street, maybe like 3 years ago when I had long hair. As soon as I cut it, like no one smiled at me. I mean, no men like smiled or like looked at me in that kind of like, oh, like, you know, potential person to stop and chat to type thing. So that was like really interesting for me to see that when I changed just like one simple thing, immediately like the perception of who I was changed a little bit as well, I think. And then the 4th one, I can't remember what it is. But yeah, that was on the presentation, so you can go back and look at that. Yeah.
We do have a few more questions, but I think maybe we can save them for the end and just move on here. Yeah.
Okay, no, that'd be great. Thank you. Thank you for everyone that's been sending questions as well. We are going to try to get through them after this very last talk. So I've allocated about 20 minutes for a larger Q&A session. So just hang 10 for the moment. So our 4th speaker is Claudia. I'll just get Claudia to wave her hand if that's okay. Now, she is on Kangaroo Island, which is just on the sort of southern tip of Australia. It's got a poor signal at the moment, so hopefully the signal will hang in there. So if she does drop out, just be patient with us. We'll try to get her re-established and reconnected. She's from Adelaide University and is an associate professor there within the School of Computer Science. She's also the convener of the university's Ally Network. So thank you so much for setting that up and running with it as well. I'm very grateful to hear that Ally Network is at Adelaide University as well. Yep. She's so mentioned, so looking at the bullet point here that I made note of, she's also created Allied Network, which has grown from 11 members, which launched a few years ago, to today, which is 270 members. So that's a phenomenal increase in membership, and really great to hear. So without further ado, I will hand this over to Claudia.
Cool. Thank you. So I'll talk a bit about how allies are one of the ways in which you can foster culture change within any organization, regardless of its size. Now, the University of Adelaide has about 4,000 staff and about 25,000 students. So it's fairly big, at least compared with the other universities in our state. So before I talk about that, I'll talk a bit about myself. So in my past, I used to be the Associate Dean for Diversity and Inclusion within the Faculty of Engineering at the University of Adelaide. And engineering, I think, at least in the Western world, is pretty much the embodiment of macho culture. There is no way in which I can sugarcoat this. And unfortunately, what happened within our faculty is that one of the professors and supervisors of various postdoctoral fellows at one point made a very homophobic comment when that postdoc was present. Of course, the postdoc wasn't out. So I guess the supervisor didn't know. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But so supervisor makes homophobic comment. I find out about that through various side channels as the Associate Dean of Diversity and Inclusion. And I start thinking about ways in which I can do something about it. And the reason why, and I always tell this story, especially when I do Ally Network trainings, because it's one of the things and definitely one of the barriers that you might encounter if you attempt to set up something like this. So you know, I said, all right, well, we're going to set up an ally network. We're going to become members for Pride in Diversity, which is a not-for-profit organization, and so on. So I said, oh, you know, it shouldn't just be our faculty doing this. It should be the whole university. So I went, of course, to the Vice Chancellor and talked about this and getting the university on board. And this was, I don't know, 3 vice chancellors ago. So what the vice chancellor responded to me was something along the lines that if we do become, and I quote, if we do become members of Pride and Diversity, we would lose momentum from all the work that we're doing to support gender within our institution. So it was a very sort of contorted argument about, you know, if you support one type of minority group, then you're clearly going to get, you're going to remove resources from another. Anyway, so I sort of like bypassed that. I set up a network which initially had a reference group of 11 people. And then that network sort of grew, and I'll talk a bit if anybody's interested. I'll talk a bit how that growth happened. But I'll talk a bit about allies as well in here. And I don't know if everybody knows, but definitely allies or an ally network is a network of people who don't necessarily identify, but who stand together with LGBTQIA people. So how do they stand? They stand in 3 ways. And when I saw Gary's slides, I was like, oh my God, I need to make a slide. So I have made 1 slide. And this is pretty much, I think, the most important slide that I want to share. Here we go. So pretty much in terms of how the allies stand, they stand in 3 ways. They stand through visibility, through education, and through volunteering. And visibility, we're talking here about lanyards, rainbow cards, rainbow flags, t-shirts, shoelaces, whatever, badges, posters, and so on. It does help if you do have an ally network. It helps if you have a budget. So I think within the second or third year of our ally network, we actually had a budget from the university, and that allowed me to buy all sorts of cool stuff from the cheapest places and just have them given to any member of our ally network who undergoes the first training. The second role that allies have is education. And in here, I think this role and how people implement it depends on how confident and how comfortable everybody feels about doing various things. So people can call out unwanted behavior, they can talk about challenges, they can ask questions. However, the most important thing in here within an ally network is if you want your allies to do any of these three, they would need the language, and therefore they would need the training in order to do that. The third thing that allies could do is they could volunteer. And in here, at least our ally network has 3 key events each year that we organize and where the network of volunteers attend. Now, in terms of training, within our network, whoever joins the network has to undergo a training that lasts for 2 hours. And then, and because I talk about this as being, you know, a lifelong learning rather than a one-stop shop for everybody to learn, there are refresher workshops that people can attend and participate and so on. There's also, for our network, there's a massive mailing list where people send questions and comments and so on. And they can also email specific people within the network if they're stuck. Now, in terms of how do you make, I think I'm done sharing here. All right, so in terms of how do you make cultural change? Now, cultural change in any organization, actually in any sort of society, can take anything from 10 to 30 to 50 years. So it's not going to be a very easy thing to do. However, within the ally network, it's really important if you have, if the members of the ally network sit on the most important committees that they can sit on, and also if they have key projects that they undertake. So at least in my university's case, I sit on the Gender and Equity and Inclusion Committee, which reports then to the executive of the university. But I also, I'm undergoing a submission to, it's called the Australian Workplace Equity Index, which basically benchmarks organizations based on how inclusive they are. In terms, I think I also wanted to talk about lessons learned here. And I think my lessons learned are that definitely people are keen to help and people are keen to help and foster change. But also within a network of volunteers, people need to be given something to do. So you gotta, as somebody who wants to make sure, like, for example, we've been talking about making sure that we have, within MVRT, we have an inclusive culture and so on. You wanna have some key projects that you identify, and then you give those projects to certain people to run with and implement. Also, I think within any organization, there will be some key people who will drive change. And if those people leave, then you must ensure that there are some other people who take up whatever it was that they're doing, because otherwise the things that they have been working on will just go away. And lastly, I think Marcel talked about this as well. You want to have, was it Marcel or maybe it was Theoden? You want to have support from human resources as well. And in here, so sorry, I should say that within the University of Adelaide, everything that I'm doing is on a volunteering basis, which means that it comes on top of everything else that I do as a professor, which is quite a lot. So it is really good if within the organization you have an appointed paid role for somebody to work on this. So my work has been significantly easier from last year when HR finally appointed a diversity officer for their role. So yeah, I think that's about me done.
Well, thank you, Claudia. I should also mention that Claudia is on holidays at the moment, so thank you so much for taking time out to be with us and for booking up very, very quick slides as well. I'm hoping that team at MVRT has got some really good, useful information on how to set up allied networks from Claudia's talk. It certainly has taught me a few things about setting up allied networks as well, so thank you very much. That's another insight for me today. And as Claudia mentioned, this is an ongoing learning that you never really cease to learn, and I certainly have learned things this evening as well from all our presenters thus far. So I'm not going to talk too much now, because I'm assuming there's quite a few questions that Sarah as Andrea fielded. So I'd like to welcome back all the panelists again, and open up the floor to Sarah and also the audience for questions.
Yeah, so our first question is, well, I guess for everybody, but mostly I think for Theatin. So one program that we do at MVRT is System, which is basically to help increase like women participation in MVRT, because we used to have mostly it was just comprised of like males on the team, and that's pretty much it. So we wanted to help support more women getting involved. So how do you think we could adapt this program to effectively include non-binary people and transgender women as well?
I think just including it in, like, if you've got like a web page or however it is you present it, just say that woman includes trans women and non-binary people as well. Yeah.
One of the pieces of work that I've done at our university talks about explicitly including people in language. So you'll see that most of the time people will use a very general language to say, you know, women are included or all staff are included, but you also want to be specific as well, because for people who have been excluded and been in a minority for a very long time, you will need to have that explicit language as well.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, which I think is very much based on, Claudia, what you've been talking about for the past 10 minutes, is how can we effectively call out unwanted behavior or notice it, or just encourage more people to talk about it? Because as high schoolers, obviously, it's pretty hard to approach people who even if you know that their behavior is not right, not inclusive, it's pretty hard to call it out and be confident enough to do so. So how can we encourage that?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty full-on thing for somebody to undertake, regardless of the context in which you're doing it. What I find is that what works best for people who know that something is wrong but are unsure of how to talk to that person, or that person is in a position of power. So there's another thing that happens in there, is to take it easy and slow. So for example, let's say, I don't know, you invite that person for a coffee or whatever, tea, whatever it is that kids drink, whatever, doesn't really matter. And you say, look, I noticed that 5 days ago or whatever, usually the timeline for addressing a behavior like this is about 48 hours to 3 days, because otherwise it sort of like gets too long. But then say, look, I heard that you said so-and-so, I'm not sure you realize, but blah, blah, blah. And then talk about, you know, the perspective, the challenges, and do a bit of education. So that's the education part. I think the more you do that, the more comfortable you become in calling out unwanted behavior. It's really good to do that. And the more somebody does that, first of all, as an education, and then full blown as when it happens, then other people will follow as well. So for example, I have a personal example. So I'm a woman in computer science, and I'm a woman in engineering, which basically means that most of the times for all of our meetings and so on, I'm the only woman visibly woman in the group. So what used to happen was that, you know, somebody will say something, it would be inappropriate, nobody will call it out, so I would call it out. But then I would see that at other meetings, the people who were, you know, being called out, or who had understood what the issues were then calling out other people. Another thing that I tell the people who attend my ally trainings is that for us, at least for us at the university, our focus is on education and on educating people, rather than on I don't know, punishing people or being very aggressive towards them. Although sometimes for me, for example, when I hear some people speak and some people making like really inappropriate comments, my first knee-jerk reaction is quite violent. But I hold that in, and then I focus on education.
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much. I think definitely it can be hard to speak up, but like hopefully we can all do better as a community. I just have a general question. We got a question from the chat. What are neo-pronouns? And I guess kind of adding on to that, how might they apply to the genderbread?
I guess this is kind of directed at me. So I guess like pronouns, so I think you said neo pronouns, so that's like new pronouns. So the traditional ones are obviously she, her, he, and then the non-binary one most commonly used is they. But there are a number of other pronouns that particularly non-binary people would use. I don't actually like use any of them myself. I think like they, ze, them is one set. But yeah, I'm sorry, what was the question again?
What are neo-pronouns? How do they fit into the genderbread? And then I guess this is me adding on to it. What are like some ways that we can, I guess, help people who might not use like the typical the typical pronouns kind of feel more included and a part of our community?
So I guess how they fit into the genderbread would be around identity, like your gender identity. So if you're identifying as non-binary, then your pronouns would then be connected to that. If you identify as a woman, then your pronouns would be she, that sort of thing. I do know a couple of people who use different pronouns, and it's just about, or like not know, but sort of like met briefly as an acquaintance of one of my partners. And yeah, it's just about getting used to the pronouns. So everyone, a lot of people have trouble even with they, them. But yeah, it's just about learning their pronoun and referring, using it and practicing it and discussing it with them, how they want to be referred to, and then respecting that. And yeah, everyone makes mistakes because it is a new concept. But yeah, it just takes time, and then you'll get used to it.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow on with the Athens comment there as well, pronouns. And one of the common issues that I have in Australia is my name is Tanner, and in Australia that predominantly is a female name, but in other countries like New Zealand and Turkey, it's not. It's actually a male name. So for those who may be in minority groups, I sometimes find it helpful to have my pronoun at the bottom of the email as well, so that when I send an email off and then the recipient of the email rings me, or I ring them to follow up my email, they don't get absolutely shocked that, oh, it's actually he, not a she. So sometimes that helps as well. So it's very similar in the field of in other minorities, not just the rainbow community with pronouns. We don't use it necessarily in other minorities, but I find that it actually is very helpful to identify which gender I am when I send out emails, not just from a gender perspective, but also from a cultural perspective as well.
Actually, my housemate she's just like a girl, but her name is Alex, and it's not Alexandra or anything, it's just Alex. And she's a lawyer, so people just naturally assume that she's male and refer to her as he in their email communications. And then if she gets on the phone, they're like, what? So I guess it's like about not making assumptions. And even if you hear someone's voice on their phone, particularly for transgender people, it may sound masculine, but they're actually she pronoun. And the same way, actually the other way, often the voice is changed by hormones a lot easier for female to male, so you might not pick that up. But yeah, for trans women, they might have a more masculine sounding voice, so not making that assumption is really important too.
So another question, I guess, on the same topic of pronouns from the chat is, How do we make it less awkward to ask someone about what their pronouns are, and kind of like how do you integrate that into conversation or when you're introducing yourself to someone?
I guess I'll take that. So I think for me, like, I don't actually really introduce my pronouns that much. Like if I'm just meeting someone, I guess, yeah, that's something that am working on, probably practicing a bit more. I guess, and what was the first part of the question again?
It was just how can you...
Oh, asking. Yeah, I think it's just straight up. Yeah, you just ask, yeah, what are your pronouns? So yeah, like my housemate, a new housemate that came in and joined recently, she just said, when we were introducing ourselves, you know, hi, whatever. Then she was just like, oh, what are your pronouns? And yeah, it was just like that. It was just a simple question. And yeah, you can just respond to that. So yeah, you don't. I think just asking just straight up is fine if you're unsure or if you want clarification.
Okay, and then another question in the chat is for everybody. What are some ways that you were able to like explore or personally accept your sexuality, especially if you weren't initially supported or group in like maybe a unaccepting area? And who are people in your life that helped you with that? And I guess how can we encourage more support for people in general?
Let me have a go with that first up, seeing I had the worst run in. It was seeing a positive role model. And as odd as this may, Tana's old enough to remember Number 96, the TV soap opera. That was the first TV show in Australia that showed a positive image of a gay couple. Admittedly, it's a TV soap opera, but one of the actors was playing a lawyer, and they were just a gay couple. It didn't, you know, it was there controversially, but the fact that there was a positive role model, admittedly we're on a soap opera, but the fact that someone was treated normally was eye-opening for me. You weren't, and I, you know, we're among friends. I wasn't a filthy queer who deserved to be bashed, if that makes sense to some of the people listening. This was the start of recognition. It really wasn't till I went to, you know, found my group, which is much easier these days. You've got Facebook and internet. It was all still landlines and letters back when I was there. There wasn't even dot matrix printers when I was young. So, you know, it's easier to find your group these days. And I suppose you need to find someone who's got kindred feelings to you fairly and that sets you up. It's basically find someone who's like you is the easiest way to begin acceptance of what you are.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. I actually agree. Gary has certainly had a very rough time as he grew up in the era where being rainbow, let alone gay, is accepted. So I'm probably a couple of decades after that. I sort of came out in the 1990s, and back then the internet was only just budding. So I didn't really have those channels to connect with other people. And I lived back then about 1.5 hours north of Sydney as well, and that's by train. So I was somewhat disconnected from the rest of the gay community. So I relied a lot on, back then there was these gay chat lines. Sorry, when I say chat lines, not for dating. It's actually for looking out for support and assistance. They certainly were a huge help for me to come out and come to terms with my sexuality. I also had a really supportive school counselor as well, which was amazing to have. And I also did have a mathematics teacher who happened to be gay. So I sought out a number of channels to help me with coming to terms with my sexuality. So for those who may be in remote areas of the US or know of people who are in remote areas of the US, definitely seek out through through channels. Nowadays, as Gary mentioned, Facebook is probably a really good starting point. I also supply to RIA, who I believe sent out to the rest of the group a list of resources that you may find helpful in the US as well. close friends, families who may be gay, that may help as well. Not someone who's gay, that may help as well. So those would be my recommendations.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have, and we're right up against the 6:30 mark. So hopefully you can respect everyone's time. So thank you all for presenting. And then I know Claudia left early, but at least the four of you, thanks so much for coming and presenting and sharing your perspective. I know it was really valuable to hear for all of our team members, and we definitely appreciated all that you guys had to say and had to share. But yeah, if you guys wouldn't mind maybe putting contact information in the chat. So if some people would like to reach out, they can, because I think it's a great resource too. Like, yeah, you were saying about role models, like have someone that you can talk to if you need to. But yeah, for everyone from MVRT, thank you guys so much for coming. And I guess that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us. I hope that this talk has been insightful. And yeah, please do contact us if there's any questions you may have from now on in the future. Thank you again for the MVRT team.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.